Welcome back to Sex Talks Podcast with me, your host, Selma Ndasilohenda Iyambo. As always, I'm super excited to be here with you, and I'm beyond grateful that you chose Sex Talks Podcast once again. If you are a first-time listener, welcome to the Sex Talks Podcast family. Here, we are all about creating an informed and educated society of young people who can openly have conversations on sexual health matters while hearing from our personal experiences and experts in the field. We are recording yet another episode live from the Be Free Youth Campus thanks to our collaboration with the Be Free Studios under the One Economy Foundation. You can find this youth-friendly space at the Multipurpose Youth Center or online at Be Free Namibia. Joining us in studio today is Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng, who will discuss the impact of unplanned parenthood, sharing insights on how to support young people who are facing unplanned parenthood, the impact it has on their mental health, importance of financial planning, and everything in between. Dr. T, as most of us fondly call her, as a medical doctor with 15 years of experience, a globally renowned medical doctor, lecturer, broadcaster, and best-selling author of Dr. T, A Guide to Sexual Health and Pleasure. She is also the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the right to health for everyone, to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. Additionally, she is an advocate for sexual and reproductive health rights, including adolescent health, with experience in legislative reform, policy, healthcare provision, and health communication. Welcome to Sex Talks Podcast, Dr. T.
Thank you for having me. And the promises were made and now they are kept. So
well, it's good to say
nice.
that Dr. T was here at the beginning of the year in Namibia, and she's here for the second time this year. And we're excited to have her here on our podcast. How are you doing? How are you finding your stay in Namibia?
I'm good. I love it. I have to go back, but I wish I didn't have to. And that means I'll be back sooner than we all think. So thank you very much for hosting me.
Wow, we love to have you back because every time you come here, this is your second home. You can consider that. Now, Dr. T, I've introduced you and you carry quite a lot of titles, but just for our audience, who is Dr. T?
Firstly, I'm a Black woman who's trying to navigate the world and make sense of the world, but also know that the world owes me a bit more than what it's currently giving, which is why I do the work in human rights. I am a medical doctor and I still see patients in clinical care, and of course the work you mentioned at the UN that merges medicine and human rights. So that's the space where I work at the moment.
Wow. If a young person is listening to your story, how did you end up finding all these spaces, careers that you occupy right now? How was it looking at 15-year-old you versus where you're currently at?
So you've been talking about a 15-year-old me, like there's a 5-year-old me. So I just recently got this tattoo done. And I think this young girl had not seen or felt what life and how difficult life can be. And so it is for this young girl that I do the work for, right? For this Tlaleng that grew up, albeit in a segregated Bantustan area in South Africa called Qwaqwa. But I knew fundamentally that even the geographical location that I was occupying, my family and my communities were occupying, was not conducive, right, to us being healthy and well and happy. But also that 15-year-old is the one that needed services, that needed healthcare workers who were empathetic, but who also had patience to listen to me and to explain to me when I was seeking services. And then being a young person in medical school, then learning how to be a doctor, but also finding that there were things I wish I had learned in medical school. And so I graduated already knowing that the kind of doctor I was made is still not the kind of doctor I needed or my community needed. And so it was important for me to reflect and interrogate that system of medicine itself and try and be a different kind of doctor in practice.
Well, if you look at now the medical doctor that left, that graduated versus the medical doctor that is serving our community, would you say that you're very much well accomplished and happy about where you are and what you're doing for your community?
I absolutely am. I went into very uncharted territory, so to say, because as a doctor, you either specialize in the traditional specializations of medicine in terms of clinical care, or you go, if you like public health, you study a master's in public health. And I knew I didn't want to do either of those two. I was criticizing and very critical and still critical of both of those fields. But I knew that I wanted to chart my own way. And human rights for me were the space where I found that there were not enough doctors and nurses and just healthcare workers in general who were having a seat in the multilateral system, in a global system, where we were not just being seen as people who needed to implement programs or people who needed to take policy and turn it into guidelines that can give services to patients. We were more than that. And so that is that voice of the healthcare worker that I knew had to come to these spaces, especially with donors as well, which many of them have unrealistic expectations in terms of indicators, in terms of how many tests must be done. For example, HIV tests, new HIV tests must be done a month for a program to be deemed successful. So there was a lot that I had to say as a clinician, as a doctor, but also as a young Black woman who had particular dreams. And I knew that my successes were still dependent on perfectly aligned miracles. And I know in my heart of hearts that for the next generation of African young people, their success and their well-being and their right to health can't depend on a series of perfectly aligned miracles. There are particular things that needs to be changed systematically, structurally, that governments have to do, but all the different multi-stakeholders in health have to commit to.
Wow. I love how you've mentioned the aspect of human rights, being a medical doctor, and you get to be in the field and speak to those patients, and you also get to sit with donors. Now, the issue of unplanned pregnancy, the situation is not any different from South Africa and Namibia, and seeing that you now work with the United Nations, what are some of the global trends that you have picked up when it comes to unplanned pregnancies?
One of the biggest mistakes in global health is positioning the issues of unsupportable pregnancies, unplanned pregnancies, as if it's an issue that affects poor Black girls in Africa. This affects all young people. It affects all children. The context may be different. The reasons why they're pregnant may be different. But ultimately, how systems should be responding with empathy, with understanding, with timely access to services, with dignified services is important for all of us. The human rights are the universal language. And of course, many people, young people, do go through sexual trauma and sexual violence before the pregnancy even becomes the evidence of the violence. They've probably been abused and violated many times. And so if public health and at a national level and a regional level, global level, we only focus on decreasing teenage pregnancy rates, it means we are blaming young girls for having the evidence of their abuse. And it cuts out a conversation to say, what about the abuse of boys? Because they too are being abused because they are children. And so for me, it requires an entire paradigm shift in terms of firstly how we understand violence and who is affected by violence. But what's also important is to talk about the fact that many people, even those who are adults, are also not prepared for parenthood. So it's not something that is lacking or is a deficiency simply because people are younger. Even older people are making grievous mistakes in how they are child rearing and how they are caregiving. And for us, especially on the Africa continent, our idea of family is not just a mother and a father who has children, right? I have a child who is being raised by my mother. In many communities, I would not be seen as legitimately a woman, never mind legitimately being called a mother. But we know that for me to be able to do the work that I do, I need support. And so why is it we understand support for other women, for them to participate in the economy, to travel the world and do the things that bring them joy? And yet we don't understand and extend the same empathy to younger women who need this kind of societal and support on an individual basis. So for me, first and foremost, it's about just understanding fundamentally that we need to approach caregiving and parenting outside the paradigm of just a mother and a father, and that we ought to be realistic about if you withhold services, for example, like an abortion service. You then can't blame young women who then get pregnant for being forced to carry pregnancies to term when you are not providing them any other option. Stockouts are a global challenge. We saw that even with COVID. Before Africa had their first lockdown regulations, we already had supply issues. Because where we get our contraceptives, those countries were already having their supply issues. So what happened to all of those women who needed contraceptives and they didn't get it? In different countries, for example, in Chile, women got defective contraception nationally. There's a court case currently right now. What kind of recourse do those women have? So if we only focus on the end result, which is a pregnancy, and forget all of the ways in which the system fails people to get to the pregnancy or making decisions on what to do with the pregnancy, we are just blaming women for being women and for their bodies doing what their bodies do.
And for killing evidence. That is indeed true when you look at it as though now the statistics of the UNAIDS report indicate to us that we have more cases of violence in children and infection. That is something that is quite worrisome. And if you look at the boy child, they don't get to carry the evidence of pregnancy. And at what point do we actually get to find out that they've been violated, and at what point do they get justice? But you've mentioned quite most of the contributing factors, and you've taken words out of my mouth. But I just want to ask, what role does comprehensive sexuality education play in preventing these unintended pregnancies?
So comprehensive sexuality education and gender education is important in that, first and foremost, it provides people information on how their bodies work, right? Before we get to illness and disease processes, just how does my body work and what are all of these different body parts and all of these different organs, so that you grow up with the appropriate knowledge for your age, for your cognitive development, and you are able to ask questions. And because we are assuming that teachers have had the training, parents themselves, many of them did not get comprehensive sexuality education at school. So they are also ill-equipped to answer some of these questions, right? So children end up going either to other children or online or to other unreliable sources. So it's important for comprehensive sexuality education, first and foremost, to be education for everyone, because there isn't a country that has provided sustainable, evidence-based, stigma-free, non-discriminatory, comprehensive sexuality and gender education. So firstly, it starts with a nationwide campaign where everyone is included. And my dream, by the way, is that every single year, when schools open, when workplaces open and there's that induction week or you start a new job, that induction week has to include sexuality and gender information that's comprehensive, because we accept that somewhere along the line you did not get this information. So if you want to talk about how you want to end sexual harassment in the workplace, that content about consent, you will find it in CSE. If you want to talk about appropriate behavior and how to navigate relationships and communication, and you're assisting teenagers, right? Because they're inquisitive, they are going out, they are dating, that information is required, is contained in CSE. So the question for me is, parents, caregivers, anyone who will come into contact with children specifically, are you feeling well equipped to give them that kind of information to help them navigate life and those challenges? And if the answer is no, before you think you can discipline them on any of those, go first learn yourself about those issues, because CSE is important to teach consent, not just for sex, for everything. Can I touch your hand? Can I hug you? May you please share your water with me? But it's important that you don't just learn how to ask for consent, because what's currently happening with intimate partner violence and street-based violence is that if I refuse to give you my cell phone number, chances are that I'm going to experience violence. So we need to teach people how to also accept the answer that comes with seeking consent, that there's no catastrophe. If someone says, I don't want to touch your hand, or I don't want to kiss you now, or no, I don't want to have sex now, right? We need to stop catastrophizing the actual answer to the consent, because that's often where most of the violence also lies. And that's why people are fearful, and that's why even in many laws, the law will talk about coercion. If you give a yes or you give consent, but underlying fear of violence, repercussions, then it's not truly consensual. So it's important that everyone learns comprehensive sexuality and gender education.
Wow. I'm listening to you speak, and the situation is not any different from Namibia when you get to hear about the cases of gender-based violence. One would say they ended the relationship, and the next day they didn't survive because the partner or the former partner came back and said, you're not going to live any further. But in the previous question, you've mentioned something about parenthood and looking at the current setting that we have in Africa for most of us. It's just not a family of a mother, a father, and a child, but we have grandkids. How do we go about planning parenthood? Not even just as adolescents or as young people, but even as adults. How do we go about that, and how do we get it right to still have a society that considers us as parents, even when I've given birth? But unfortunately, I still have dreams that I want to chase, and I give it to my mother or to my grandmother to take care of it.
And you see, that's why the right to health is so important, because when you get it right and you offer people services, you give them the information to make informed decisions when the time comes. They can delay a pregnancy. They can decide how many children to have, if at all. They can decide even how to space those children. So some people may have a child quite early and decide that once my child is 3 or 5, I'm actually going to go back to school and study, and they space and have another child when they are done with their studies. Some people could be that they want to go work first for a few years and then have their first child. We also need to allow parenthood to be self-determined in the true sense, that people must be able to make true autonomous decisions, and that governments everywhere must be able to provide the healthcare that is accessible, affordable, of quality to support those decisions. Many of us are not lacking a vision for our lives. What we are lacking is services that take into account what those decisions mean, what our lifestyles mean. And often systems want people to tailor themselves to the system, whereas it's the system that must meet the client or the health seekers or the human rights holders' needs. And so this, you will often hear it, young people must speak, adolescents must speak up, women must speak up. Like women, young people, even if we say nothing for the next 100 years, we've said enough already in terms of what we want from a dignified healthcare system, what we want from family planning, what we want in terms of modern contraception methods. And so for me, it's more about, is the system truly creating an opportunity for us to enjoy the right to health? And so the issue of the right to health and why it's affirming is that when we do get it right, it does open up avenues for economic participation, access to education, access to cultural, sporting participation, civil rights, political rights. How many women fall off in politics because she had to give birth, and suddenly she's consumed by all of that, because even the society claims to support women, but it's almost like it's a test. Or you think you can be in politics and work and be a mom. Let's see how strong you'll be. And as a test, support is withdrawn. So what kind of societal support can we embed in policy? What kind of societal and systemic support can we embed in our medical guidelines that can screen women for postpartum depression, that can screen women for food security, that can ensure that when we say we are discharging you with a new infant, you actually have a safe home to be? Many women don't have a same space to be because their very abusers are their partners. And now not only are you sending a woman back to that space, you are sending her back with a new infant, right? And then we are saying, oh, but mental illness of women is not where it should be, or there's this mother, who committed all sorts of things, but without really thinking about all of the different layers and the different traumas and violations that they experience. We just focus on the pregnancy, the end result, and the fact that to be a good woman, she must just have resilience and just be strong throughout of these obstacles. But what's actually the responsibility of governments, of communities, to ensure that structurally people are supported?
Wow. You know, I was quite fortunate today to sit in a discussion with Dr. T, whereby we're having a thing of, as a healthcare provider, you prescribe medication for those people and you tell them, take it 3 times a day. But do we ever take it beyond of, do you have food in order for you to take this medication 3 times a day? And these are the key highlights of the type of society that we live in. Hey, Sex Talks listeners! Ever wish you had a safe space where you can have honest conversations, get expert advice, and enjoy fun activities? Well, guess what? The Be Free Youth Campus is here for you, and they are not just another campus. They are your one-stop center for holistic, clinical, mental, and psychological support for young people aged 13 to 35. The campus is open on Monday to Friday from 8 to 5 to all its members. Their services include reproductive health screening and referral, sexual transmitted infection screening and treatment, HIV testing, counseling and treatment, contraceptives, pregnancy tests, antenatal care, PrEP and PEP, pap smears, and more at only $8 per year. The Be Free Youth Campus also has programs such as chess, robotics, self-defense lessons, and so much more. Are you interested in being a member? Visit the campus to pick up an application form, or you can get one via the link in their bios at Be Free Namibia on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. They also have free Wi-Fi at their facilities. So if you are ready to ditch the shame, take charge of your future, and connect with other awesome young people, come down to the Be Free Youth Campus today. They are located on Bodell Street at the Windhoek Multipurpose Youth Complex in Katutura. For more information, visit them online at Be Free Namibia. Your journey to a healthier and happier you starts here at the Be Free Youth Campus. And I love how you've mentioned the aspect of mental health. And I'm going to come to you because you've mentioned that you also have a daughter. How was your journey with mental health during pregnancy?
So before I got pregnant, I knew that I wouldn't have any issues with attachment or detachment, for that matter. And I was very happy about that I had a mother, but who was looking forward to being a grandmother to raise the grandchildren. So I have no issues, I have no feelings, I have no attachments to that process at all. My body did what it needed to do for 9 months. Physiologically speaking, it did what it needed to do, and it raised a human, and I gave birth. And I had arranged in advance that, you know, my mom would step in, and she did. And my children have been with her, you know, all this time, so that I can do the work that I can do, which includes far too much traveling. But it's only because of that kind of support that I had. And support would look different for different women. It may look like your own mother. It may look like maybe not your own maternal mother, but a mother figure. It may look like an auntie. It may look like a cousin. It may look like a friend. It may look, you know, and we need to allow ourselves as African and unshackle ourselves from these ideas of what constitutes and defines a family, because that really limits our abilities to just be creative as people, but to really just leverage life and the opportunities that life you know, offer us. So for me, in my household, it was a negotiated, and we spoke about the kind of life that needs to happen. And so for me to be at my best, at my peak, and do what I love, that's what needed to happen. Granny needed to step up and fix her sins with me and be the best grandmother she could be, because they are always doing that. They are better to their grandchildren anyway. But for me, it's been a joy to see them, how they bond, right, between grandmother and grandchild, in ways that I would have never had the privilege of seeing either of them. And so it's also, in a way, for me, also a privileged space to be able to also witness that as well.
You know, I'm looking at you from a position of privilege to say that you have been able to have a supporting mother that has been able to step in. But now I'm looking at your experience and the fact that you now work with the United Nations, and you get to see a lot of setting whereby there's either planned pregnancy, and for the African context, planned pregnancy is quite a tricky one. What are some of the challenges that you now have observed that young people do face throughout this journey, especially when it comes to the aspect of mental health?
So I always say, because the doctor and the scientist in me, right, the nerd, always says no pregnancy is planned. Because no one knows, is it on the second day or the third day or the fourth day that the sperm meets the ovary, right? No one can plan that truly and claim to plan that. But what we know is that people are having sex without condoms and they are not on any other hormonal contraceptive. That we know. And we know that the result of having sex without a condom and no contraception means there's a possibility that someone with a uterus is going to get pregnant as a result of that. And so even with couples who are married, no one plans that this is the day that we are going to get pregnant. You hope, and sometimes it doesn't happen, right? You have a lot of people who are young and who want to get pregnant and they plan, and it just simply does not happen for no identifiable medical reason. So what you are talking about is this idea of fertility, right? And fertility management and the politics around who's allowed to actually leverage and enjoy their fertile bodies versus who is policed and controlled for the very fertility that their bodies give. And there's a historical political context in that. And so the same language around I fell pregnant. You don't just fall pregnant. No one falls pregnant. There is literal intercourse that happens that leads us to pregnancy. There may be modern assisted methods of getting pregnant, and that's fine. And that opens up the conversation to families that are also not just mother-father, but also mother and mother, dad and dad, right? And all of those are valid. And for me, what's difficult is to then see the regressions that are then happening in some parts of the world, including on the Africa continent, when it comes to sexual and reproductive health rights, when it comes to important issues of non-discrimination, because that goes beyond just inclusion, right? Non-discrimination is a big principle in human rights, and equality is a big principle of human rights. And so families have become a contested space globally. The church has a voice. I mean, the Catholic Church is the only church with a seat in the United Nations, right? That's huge. That tells you everything you need to know about the power of the Catholic Church. And I tell you that as a Catholic who's confirmed, who's got Catholic priests and whose mother is the head of the liturgy, right? So all of those are the political contexts of that question of fertility management, what's happening globally with planned pregnancy, with unplanned pregnancy. What's different is that in some societies, a pregnancy is rewarded with social support, where some women are given a grant and social support immediately from when they know they are pregnant, so they can ensure they're having the right vitamins, they're eating well, and they can save money for the child and their clothes and food, you know, when they are born. They continue getting a grant. Those children continue getting a grant for primary education as well, you know. In other contexts, that pregnancy is shamed, that young person is shunned, and so the punishment of who gets pregnant and where you are located geographically often determines what often ends up to you. And that's why it's a human rights violation, because you shouldn't deserve humanity or dignity based on whether you are born in a global north country or a rich country or anything like that. But currently, the management of fertility, the conversation around who gets pregnant and when, and therefore how the system responds, is a very political issue.
Wow. I'm going to take you back, as I was like mental, now financial implications, and you've touched slightly onto it. But now we're going to move away from access to health for everyone, from now the mother to the child, and looking at the fact that for some, they're born in a setting where they can be able to receive a grant, whilst for others, they're just shamed and there's nothing available for them. Now, as the UN Rapporteur, how is that working around from ensuring that access to health is not only on the side of the mother, but also the unborn child, or the child that comes in a world where they're either shamed, they're loved, or for others, it even gets worse to the extent that they try to kill them even after they were born.
And so here's the very basic principle in medicine. If there's an emergency on the obstetric table, you save the mother. That's how it goes. You save the life of the woman in front of you, and not the hypothetical one that's coming. You save the life of the mother. And so, if you want healthy pregnancy outcomes, you have to invest in women, period. You can't have a system that's misogynistic, that's sexist, that's transphobic, that's ableist, where women are getting pregnant in those conditions. And then miraculously, because they are now pregnant, you want to invest some kind of program for those maybe 6 months, because some people only find out maybe when they are 3 months, 4 months into the pregnancy. Now suddenly you want to invest in them so that you can have healthy babies at the end. It does not work that way. You have to actually respect and see women as human and as people who are deserving of health and wellness in of themselves, whether or not they end up pregnant or not. Because a lot of the micro deficiencies, the macronutrient deficiencies, we are getting pregnant already with them. We are already anemic because people are not taking us seriously when we say particular contraceptives are causing us abnormal bleeding. We are not being taken seriously because of fibroids or endometriosis and delayed diagnosis and treatment. So by the time the pregnancy happens, many women are already on the back foot. And that's not the time to try and get her to be healthy and eventually a healthy infant at the end as well. So unless systems change, and that's why there are human rights issues. And I say this as well in my reports to the UN, by the way. I did a report on the impact of COVID on SRHR. I did a report on racism on SRHR, talking about, on the one hand, a biomedical issue, right, that demanded of the world to think and be different and to prioritize health differently. And on the one hand, a structural systemic issue like racism, because as Black women, we are racialized in a particular way. Our lives are not prized in the same way as our white counterparts. So the kind of advocacy that's required for us as just women can't be only tied to our ability to get pregnant, because that's how transphobia works. That's how people gatekeep womanhood. Oh, you're not woman enough because you're infertile. You're not woman enough because you haven't born children. Like, when does this womanhood start and stop? And most of it is around fertility and the bearing of children. And it's a very patriarchal, paternalistic way of us even interacting with our own bodies, right? And so the fourth trimester, if I may say, is something that I'm advocating for, not only just for mental health, but also for economic support as well. Now we understand the third trimester. The first, second, and the third is the last one. But the fourth trimester, if it's recognized as an actual trimester that the WHO, UNFPA, all of the UN agencies can support, the International Labour Organization can support, it means that governments will be forced, in the same way that they have a maternal program for antenatal care, they will be forced to have a program for postpartum care in those first 3 months, because that's when a lot of the mental health issues start. Economic insecurity, food insecurity start, the screening for gender-based violence and intimate partner violence start, shelter. Many women are without, sustainable, safe shelter as well when they get discharged from hospitals. But without recognizing the fourth trimester, which would effectively be postpartum care, I still think we'll be failing. So maybe there's an advocacy campaign we can start to get the world, but also these important standard-setting organizations to recognize the fourth trimester as also important.
Amazing stuff. You are still tuned on to Sex Talks podcast with me, your host, and we have Dr. T in studio with us who gets to share more light. I swear I could speak to you all day, but we unfortunately are leaning more to the end of this episode, and we recently celebrated the day, International Day of the Girl Child. What would be your key message to girls out there, and how can we as a society and as males in gender non-conforming play a role towards grooming a better girl child?
So I think what's important is to remove the level of violence and controlling of children, but particularly girls. Girls are disciplined, parented to remove curiosity out of them, to remove adventure out of them. and to remove that loud voice out of them. So what I would say is that we need to support young girls being audacious, being bold, even in the mundane, even in the everyday things of, I just want to climb a tree. Let the girls climb a tree. If there's pedophiles in your family who would look up the skirt of girls climbing up trees, get rid of the pedophile. Stop saying that children must not climb up trees because what will the adults be looking at? So that's where we need to start, right? Allow children to be children. If it's hot and children need to wear shorts, let children wear shorts. If children cannot wear shorts in your community because you are worried about the drunkard uncles, the problem is not the children who are hot and in shorts or in swimming costume. The problem is you protecting pedophile, drunkard uncles in your community and creating a community and a society where those kinds of people thrive and those kinds of principles thrive, and therefore the practice of blaming children for what adults do and therefore how we discipline girls happens. Many girl children are disciplined by a threat of you will be kicked out of this house. If you come here pregnant, you will get out of this school. If you do this, this will happen. And that creates already a sense of trauma in children. It creates a sense of instability and never being secure and sure of anything. And we take it for granted what it does mentally for you to grow up knowing that even in your own home, with the people who are supposed to love you the most unconditionally, are the ones who are threatening to take away the very basic things that you need to live, not thrive, just to live. And that's what needs to change. We need to learn how to discipline, we need to learn how to parent, but first we need to accept and admit that what we've been doing doesn't work. For as long as we can explain it and come up with excuses, we won't move with the paradigm shift that is required, but that is what's required.
Amazing stuff. Before we can let you go, Dr. T, you've been here at the Be Free Youth Campus engaging with young people. How has your experience been engaging with the young people of Namibia, and maybe linking it back to you being the UN Rapporteur? What are some of the observations in terms of challenges that are facing young people in Namibia?
So my visit this time around, I mean, of course, I can never get rid of the UN Special Rapporteur head, right? So, and that's fine. But my interest in young people, specifically in Namibia, was to bring a partnership between our Equity, which is an organization I founded in South Africa, to institutionalize the work that I do as Dr. T, that it actually has a place and a home where it lives, where there can be some kind of legacy as well, but also professionalization to the work, because I've been doing it now for more than 15 years. But I think it's time to move, right, and build and think about legacy as well. And in partnership with One Economy Foundation, the Be Free campus is really important, because not just as a metaphorical idea, but literal physical structure that is safer for young people to be able to gather. It's very hard to be a young person who yourself is young and just wants to be young, but also secondly, have a sense of duty to want to make things better. So my task was to listen, but to inspire and bring information around human rights and health and SRHR and how it links to issues that many of the youth experience, and hopefully inspire some ideas around what is possible, realizing that young people don't have the power or the authority or even the mandate or the resources to change many of the challenges that they have recognized. But it is important through the collective championship that we are building, that they know that firstly they are not alone, which is usually a good thing to do first and foremost. If you know that the challenges you're not going through, you're not alone, it helps. And then secondly, to then have a resource between One Economy Foundation and our Equity, where we can see how we can further, do these transformational leadership courses, because I believe in the leadership of young people. So for me, it's how can we support you transform your own societies, because you are already leaders anyway. And human rights, for me, remain the key.
Thank you for believing in young people, Dr. T. You have 1 minute to wrap it up, and what would you say to any young person listening to this podcast?
I would say that you have a right to be young and to be free and to be wild and to imagine a world of your wildest dreams, and that the world continues to let many of us down, and that I hope through the work that I do at the UN can inspire a level of hope that perhaps maybe one of us is there and I can say things to the UN that perhaps would not have been said if one of us wasn't there, which is a tall task, yeah? Mm-hmm. But I think for me, it's to give that sense of hope and to know that what drives me is first and foremost your dignity, and that the work I do and the demands I'm making in the global space are first and foremost about your dignity and centering that before profits, before government interests, before any other interests of philanthropies, for example, even the interest of the UN themselves, is the dignity of especially African people, Black people everywhere in the world, and people of African descent, because the world owes us that at the very basic is to rehumanize ourselves, but take back and restore our dignity.
Thank you so much for taking time from your very, very busy schedule to be here with us, to share your experiences, your insights with us. It's been amazing being in your company. And with that being said, we have come to the end of our episode with Dr. T. Please do make sure to engage with us. That is on our various social media platforms and our